are talking about the World War II action movie Enemy Lines. Now this one is directed by Anders Bank, and this one stars John Hannah, who is the biggest name here, and he has a relatively small role, to be honest with you, but nonetheless he plays Colonel Preston, who is an English officer who sets a kind of a joint task force between American and British troops to try and go inside occupied Poland to liberate a German scientist who is working to try and develop some type of new technology for the war. And whilst they are in there, they need to meet up with some Polish resistance, and obviously they need to overcome the Nazis. But there's the added wrinkle that unexpectedly the Soviets, the Russians, have also sent in a team to try and extract this kind of scientist as well for their own war effort. And obviously although they are technically allies, they are not exactly on the same page. So that is your basic kind of premise here. It's more of a, it's a small group of soldiers going behind enemy lines and attacking in a low budget fashion. First of all, what worked first and foremost with this movie, for a relatively low budget film, I did say I thought some of the authenticity here was quite good. The use of, appropriate weapons, tanks, that sort of thing. And I really appreciated that we have this kind of, obviously set in Poland, we have this kind of snowy terrain that gives it a very dynamic look to it. So I feel the movie really benefits us. And then we have seen a few war movies that do this. But it gives it a very kind of a distinct look, I would say. And you can kind of feel the cold that these guys are having to kind of like go through. We do get to know our small group of soldiers pretty well. There's some quite fun interplay. Obviously, they are led by, of course, the square-jawed American, and we do, have various encounters with various other, different sort of people along the way. One thing I really appreciated, and it's the temptation here, is to have, like, for example, the Germans speak English but with a German accent, and the Polish speak Polish in the Polish accent, etc. But here, they actually all do speak their native languages, which I thought was good. Now, for ease of consumption, sometimes that is the path that they take, but for more realism, obviously it makes sense for the people to speak their native language, and we do have a lot. We have, obviously, there's scenes that involve, obviously, the Nazis talking with each other, obviously in German, Polish, and then also the Russians as well. So this movie actually has a multitude of kind of languages spoken in it, and even the kind of like the non-English speaking cast do get a bit of characterization and scenes of their own as well. There are some battle scenes here that are exciting, albeit maybe not shot particularly realistically. And again, we'll come on to that in a second. But nonetheless, this feels like it's a war movie which is like, we went to cheer the good guy, cheer the allies and kind of like cheer them on and wonder how they get out of these amazing odds, if that makes sense. And we've seen films like this, very kind of patriotic to obviously the country that it's made for. And although it's not like a silly action film, it doesn't really kind of do too much realism in regard to the actual war, the fighting itself. So let's just move on to maybe what doesn't work. If we look at the kind of the body count to this movie, I mean that we have a band of 5 or 6 Allied troops, and they kill seemingly hundreds of Nazis. Now, things like this may have happened, but it just seems a little bit OTT, where these guys, I mean, some of them die, obviously, but they're so outnumbered, and the odds are so not in their favour that you can almost make like a kind of a Rambo comparison here, the way these guys are kind of fighting such overwhelming odds, but seem to manage to kind of get out of it pretty much all of the time. Now, as far as I know, this story itself isn't based specifically on a true story, although there are instances where people were extracted from behind enemy lines and things like that. So, again, I think that's because it's not telling a specific story. It's just based on a kind of like a vague missions and stuff that have happened. Again, it adds to that sort of more of a heroic fantasy rather than a true depiction of the World War II. It's not to say that the violence isn't, you know, isn't brutal, but it just is a little bit shoot 'em up rather than kind of like a realistic portrayal of maybe what it is. And this is an entertainment movie first and foremost, so I guess we do have to you know, imagine that, and we do have to ask ourselves what we want from it. But nonetheless, that's the reality of it. There are some issues with some green screen here. Like I said, I appreciated the fact that we have scenes that involve tanks and various kind of like vehicles and things that are obviously authentic to the time. But there are certain shots here, particularly at the beginning of the movie, where they're on their kind of on their way to Poland via sea, and it looks some really horrible model work in green screen. Looks particularly kind of jarring at times. I feel some of the characters as well are a little bit on the cliched side. Again, I don't want to give spoilers necessarily, but there are certain characters here that would embody the stereotypical traits of their respective countries, so to speak. But I would say if you're not requiring true realism in a kind of a World War II movie, and you just want to have an action film rather than a realistic depiction of war, then it's a fun watch for a kind of a lower budget movie. I actually quite enjoyed it. I still, you know, it's not exactly turning your brain off. This doesn't go quite that kind of cheesy, but it's certainly, you have to kind of lower the volume a little bit, shall we say. So yeah, I actually still kind of enjoyed this one, to be honest. It's a fun action romp, I suppose, with elements of realism, but not out and out realistic. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.